He looked me dead in the eye and called me useless. 12 years of standing beside him through failed businesses, long nights, and the years when we had nothing, all erased by a single moment of arrogance. I had just lost my job, the career I had poured my life into, and instead of comfort, instead of a shred of compassion, he laughed. He laughed in my face as though my worth could be measured by a paycheck. As though the nights I stayed awake balancing bills, the mornings I woke early to push him forward had meant nothing at all. He called me disposable, replaceable. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. What he didn't know was that I had already secured something he could never touch. The night before his cruel words, I had signed a deal that placed $100 million into my own account. Money that was mine, protected by every law, untouchable by him or anyone else. He thought I was broken. He thought he had won. But the truth was, his triumph would last only as long as his ignorance. Because the day he finally discovered my secret was the day the smirk vanished from his face, and he realized that the woman he tried to tear down had built something far greater than he could ever imagine. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rachel Carter was 42 years old, and for more than a decade she had been the backbone of her marriage. The woman who carried the quiet weight of responsibility while her husband tried and failed in business after business. To everyone on the outside, she was the supportive wife, the one who always found a way to keep the lights on, the one who patched together stability out of chaos. Yet to Mark Carter, her husband, she was nothing more than a convenience until the day he decided she no longer served his image. Mark Carter was ambitious, polished, and arrogant. He lived for the way people looked at him in admiration, for the praise he collected in boardrooms and at dinner tables, even if most of it was built on Rachel's unseen labor. And then there was Elaine Carter, Mark's mother, sharp-tongued and controlling, a woman who seemed to believe Rachel would never measure up, no matter how much she sacrificed. Elaine had spent years reminding Rachel of her shortcomings, always with that cutting undertone of superiority, fueling the narrative that Rachel was somehow less than what her husband deserved. And finally, waiting in the wings, was Vanessa Brooks, the younger, glamorous woman Mark paraded as an upgrade. She was everything Rachel was not in his eyes, new, unburdened, and ready to step into the life Rachel had built without lifting a finger. Together they formed a picture Rachel knew too well, one of betrayal, of disregard, of being cast aside after years of devotion. But beneath the surface of that picture lived a secret Mark could never have anticipated. Rachel had hidden $100 million behind layers of trust accounts and legal protections, money she secured before Mark ever thought to leave. The question was never whether she had the means to survive. It was how long she could keep that secret buried while Mark strutted in his false victory. Why did Mark humiliate Rachel in front of friends and family when she lost her job? How long could she conceal her $100 million fortune before he caught wind of it? And most of all, what would happen the day Mark Carter finally uncovered the truth? The answer would shake every illusion he had ever built about himself. And when he finally learned her secret, it was already too late. Rachel Carter had built her life on discipline and persistence. By the time she was in her early 40s, she was not just another professional lost in the shuffle of corporate America. She was a senior engineer with a reputation for precision and innovation. Her name had appeared on multiple patents, breakthroughs in medical technology that gave her a quiet but undeniable respect within her field. Yet inside her home, those accomplishments never seemed to matter. To Mark Carter, the husband she had supported for 12 long years, Rachel's work was background noise to his own ambitions. Mark had tried everything, startups, consulting, even risky investments that collapsed under their own weight, and through each failure it was Rachel who steadied the ship. She was the one who balanced the accounts late into the night, who kept a smile on her face in public even when the mortgage teetered on the edge of default. Mark liked to talk about being self-made, but those who knew the truth could see the irony. He was not self-made. He was made possible by Rachel. Elaine Carter, Mark's mother, never saw it that way. To Elaine, Rachel was always falling short, no matter how much she carried. Her criticisms were constant, like a dripping faucet that never ceased. "Some women just aren't cut out for responsibility," she would remark, her glass of wine in hand, as though the woman sitting across from her had not spent the last decade keeping her son afloat. Elaine carried herself with the authority of someone who believed her words were final, and each one chipped at Rachel in ways few people outside that household could ever understand. Yet Rachel endured, not with loud defiance, but with quiet resilience. She learned long ago that her strength was not in shouting back, but in building quietly, carefully, until one day the foundation she laid could no longer be ignored. Those who watched closely could see it. The steadiness in her eyes when Mark made grand speeches, the calm in her posture when Elaine's words cut deepest. Rachel had the kind of strength that did not bend under pressure. She simply absorbed it, stored it, and used it to fuel her next move. And what no one knew, not Mark, not Elaine, not even the woman waiting to replace her, was that Rachel had already taken steps to protect her future. Long before Mark decided she was expendable, she had built safeguards around herself. That strength revealed itself late one evening, long after Mark had drifted off to sleep, his phone buzzing with messages from business contacts who were more illusion than substance. Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table, the soft glow of her phone reflecting on her face. With one steady hand, she unlocked the banking app tied to her trust account. And there it was, a number so staggering it seemed almost unreal. $100 million. The patent she had sold, the innovation she had poured her heart into, had transformed into a fortune, hidden where no one could touch it. She stared at the balance quietly, the corners of her mouth barely lifting in the faintest smile. This was her insurance, her shield, her way out. Mark thought he had built the narrative. Elaine thought she had written the ending. But Rachel Carter had already secured the truth. It was a Tuesday when Rachel Carter's world shifted in a way she would never forget. For 9 years she had walked through the doors of the company that had become her second home, a place where her name carried weight, where her ideas shaped projects that earned millions in revenue. But that afternoon, when her manager asked her to step into his office, she felt the heaviness in the air before a word was spoken. Downsizing, realignment, sustainability. The kind of sterile language companies used when they wanted to mask betrayal as strategy. Rachel sat still as the words cut through her, each one finalizing what she already knew the moment she was called in. Her position was gone. The career she had nurtured was being erased in the name of numbers on a spreadsheet. She packed her things in silence, drove home through streets blurred by fading daylight, and thought perhaps her husband would at least pretend to care. By 6 o'clock, the house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, though Rachel hadn't cooked it. Mark Carter had ordered catering, as he often did when he wanted to impress. He was in the living room, bourbon in hand, holding court with 2 of his closest friends, Tom and Greg. Laughter filled the air as Rachel slipped off her coat, the weight of her day pressing heavily against her chest. She entered quietly, hoping to disappear into the background, but Mark turned with a smile that held no warmth. "Everyone, this is my unemployed wife," he announced, his words slicing through the room with cruel precision. He laughed, sipping slowly, as if humiliation were a punchline. Greg chuckled awkwardly. Tom shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Rachel's eyes. And there she stood, forced to smile politely while her husband turned her pain into entertainment. Elaine Carter sat at the far end of the table, a glass of Chardonnay balanced delicately in her hand. She had been in town for a week, and as always, her presence was less comfort and more critique. "Well," Elaine said, swirling her wine, "some women just aren't cut out for real responsibility. That's not a bad thing, it just means you're better suited for other roles." Her tone was smooth, but every word landed like a blade. Rachel did not reply. She did not need to. The meaning was clear enough. Mark leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the stage he had set. "Don't worry, babe," he said with exaggerated sympathy. "I'll handle the big stuff from now on. You can..." I don't know, join a book club or something." The men laughed along, emboldened by Mark's smugness. Rachel's hands rested calmly in her lap, her face composed, but inside every word sank into her like stones sinking into water. Yet unlike the others, Rachel did not break. She simply watched, her gaze steady, her mind elsewhere. Because what Mark Carter did not know, what Elaine Carter could not begin to imagine, was that months earlier Rachel had sold a medical technology patent she herself had designed. She had taken the quiet hours of her life, the unrecognized brilliance that never found applause at home, and turned it into something extraordinary. $99,800,000 had been transferred into her trust account, a sum that gave her a freedom Mark could never take away. She had sat across from lawyers and signed the deal under her maiden name, shielding it from his grasp. She had built herself a fortress while he bragged to his friends. So while Mark gloated and Elaine sharpened her words, Rachel remained silent. She sipped her water slowly, watching the ice shift against the glass. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. Instead, she allowed him to believe the story he was spinning, to bask in his moment of false triumph. The dinner ended with coats shrugged on, with laughter that echoed his arrogance, with Elaine's perfume lingering in the air like judgment. Mark patted Rachel's shoulder with mock kindness. "We'll get through this, babe," he said, as though he were the hero of her downfall. Rachel looked up at him, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but every word carried the weight of certainty. "I'm sure we will." And as she walked away from the table, the truth settled in her chest like armor. Mark Carter had no idea what she had already done, no idea what shield she had built in secret. Later, alone in the quiet of the kitchen, Rachel whispered to herself almost like a vow, "He has no idea what I've done." The morning Rachel Carter opened the door to find Mark Carter standing there with his lawyer at his side, she already knew what was coming. Mark carried himself with that familiar air of smug certainty, his tie knotted perfectly, his posture rehearsed, as though he were preparing for a stage play in which the ending had already been written. Beside him, his lawyer, a younger man with slicked hair and a sharp smile, carried a leather briefcase that he placed on the kitchen table without asking. "We've discussed what's fair," Mark began, his voice deliberate, heavy with false benevolence. "Given how different our paths are now, this is really a mercy. You should find someone who actually needs a partner." The lawyer slid a stack of papers toward her, speaking smoothly as though reading from a script. "This settlement offers clarity. No long drawn-out process, no unnecessary drama. You'll have your clothes, personal belongings, and a modest stipend to help you start fresh. A clean break for both of you." Rachel sat in silence, letting their words hang in the air. She did not argue. She did not even sigh. Instead, she reached for the pen, her expression calm, almost detached. Mark's eyes flickered to his lawyer, the brief exchange between them carrying a quiet satisfaction. They thought her silence was surrender. They believed her signature was desperation. She signed each page without hesitation, sliding them back across the table with steady hands. Mark leaned back, the smirk spreading across his face. "You're doing the right thing," he said, as if the words carried weight. She met his gaze briefly, then lowered her eyes again, allowing him to believe he had won. Inside, however, Rachel was already cataloging every password, every property deed, every piece of information that Mark had overlooked. Once they were gone, Rachel moved through the house deliberately. She opened drawers, pulled documents from cabinets, slid photocopies of contracts into neat folders. Every receipt, every transfer, every title. She gathered them quietly, methodically, until the stacks of boxes lining the hallway looked like the belongings of a woman preparing to leave. But inside those boxes was more than fabric and photographs. Inside them was evidence. Proof of what Mark had done and what he believed she would never discover. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, Rachel had already transformed the home into something different, a vault of secrets she alone could unlock. Weeks later, Rachel began to hear whispers of Mark's new life. Vanessa Brooks, the fiancée he paraded on his arm, had begun inserting herself into conversations, hosting parties, and speaking of the future as though it were already hers. At one gathering, Vanessa boasted about the house. "Once the paperwork clears, this place will finally be ours," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "We'll finally have the kind of space we deserve." Rachel did not confront her. She did not reveal that buried deep in the title paperwork was a clause Mark had never noticed, one that prevented the house from being sold or transferred without Rachel's consent. She simply smiled, letting Vanessa believe she had already claimed victory. Meanwhile, Mark had begun living as if wealth were infinite. Photos appeared on social media. Mark behind the wheel of a rented Ferrari, Vanessa in designer gowns at rooftop bars, champagne flowing at tables where they laughed too loudly. Friends spoke of trips to Aspen, weekends in Miami, money pouring out faster than it came in. Rachel watched quietly, her expression calm. For every dollar he flaunted, she knew the credit lines he was burning through still bore her name as guarantor. Each charge tied him further to her in ways he did not comprehend. The day Rachel made her decision, she walked into her advisor's office, calm and resolute. "I want every joint credit line he's touched since the separation closed," she said. Her advisor hesitated, then nodded, understanding the finality in her tone. Within hours, the accounts were frozen, the balances called in for repayment. Rachel left the office with a folder in hand, her heels clicking against the sidewalk, each step measured and certain. That evening, her phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen was one she no longer needed to answer. She let it ring, the vibration steady against her hand. Then the text arrived, sharp and panicked. "What the hell did you just do?" Rachel read the words in silence, her lips curving into the faintest smile. He had felt the first crack, but he had no idea just how deep the damage would run. The café sat on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place where polished brass fixtures gleamed under the morning light, and conversations blended into a soft hum. Rachel Carter arrived early, choosing a table in the center of the room, the kind of seat where no one could miss her presence. She placed her bag carefully on the chair beside her, folded her hands on the table, and waited. 10 minutes later, the door swung open, and Mark Carter walked in. His eyes found her immediately, and the confident stride that once carried him into every room with ease now seemed edged with impatience. He reached the table without offering a greeting, his voice sharp, his words clipped. "You need to undo what you did," he said, leaning forward as though sheer force of will would bend her to his command. Rachel tilted her head slightly, her calmness a deliberate contrast to his urgency. "Sit down, Mark," she replied. "If we're going to talk, let's at least pretend to be civil." Mark dropped into the chair across from her, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of the table. "The credit lines," he hissed. "You froze them. Do you have any idea what you've done? You're strangling me financially. I can't move money, can't cover payments. You need to fix this now." Rachel did not flinch. Her voice was even, steady. "It was necessary. Any responsible person would have done the same. You were burning through accounts with my name attached. That ends today." His face hardened, his lips parting as if to deliver another blow, but at that moment the door opened again, and Vanessa Brooks entered. She wore a smile like armor, her movements deliberate, her eyes sweeping across the café until they landed on the two of them. She crossed the floor with measured grace and stopped at their table. "Am I interrupting?" she asked, her tone tinged with smug curiosity. Rachel's gaze met hers unshaken. "Not at all," Rachel replied. "Please join us." Vanessa slid into the seat beside Mark, resting one manicured hand on his arm as if to remind everyone of her place. "I suppose this is about the mess you've made with the accounts," Vanessa said lightly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. Mark leaned forward again, his voice pressing. "Rachel, undo this. Whatever you think you're gaining, it isn't worth it." Rachel reached calmly into her bag, her movements unhurried. She pulled out a sealed envelope, thick with documents, and placed it on the table between them. There was no flourish, no dramatics, only the quiet certainty of someone who knew the strength of what she held. Her fingers tapped the envelope once before she spoke. "Inside," she said evenly, "is a notarized summary of the sale of my patent. $100 million, signed and secured long before you thought to leave. And because it was created and sold before our marriage, it is not marital property. It belongs to me. Entirely." The silence that followed was heavy. Mark's face drained of color, his confidence collapsing in an instant. His lips parted, but no words came out. His lawyer was not here to smooth over the moment. No smug smile to hide behind. No courtroom where he thought he held the upper hand. Here, in the bright light of an ordinary café, he was stripped of the illusion he had built around himself. Vanessa's eyes darted to the envelope, then back to Rachel. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the first cracks of realization showing in her expression. "Wait," she whispered, her voice tight. "You've had this all along? You let us—" She stopped, the words caught in her throat. She was calculating now, understanding that the man she had chosen as an upgrade was not standing on wealth but on debt. Debt that no longer had Rachel as its safety net. Mark leaned closer, his voice faltering, desperate. You can't just—" Rachel's gaze remained steady, her tone calm but final. "I already did. This was mine before you, and it's still mine now." The weight of the truth pressed into every corner of the room, leaving no space for denial. Vanessa pulled her hand back from Mark's arm, her confidence dissolving into something colder. Mark stammered, searching for words that would not come, his arrogance evaporating with each passing second. Rachel rose from her seat slowly, smoothing her jacket as though this were nothing more than another meeting concluded. She left the envelope where it was, untouched by the trembling hands across the table. Without a glance back, she walked toward the door, her steps measured, her posture calm. Behind her, Mark Carter sat in silence, the smirk that once defined him gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who finally realized the game was over. Vanessa's eyes followed Rachel to the door, her own face pale with the dawning truth. Rachel pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the sunlight, the cool air meeting her with a quiet sense of freedom. The cafe door closed behind her, muting the chaos she had left at the table. For the first time in years, she carried nothing but her own certainty. She did not need to say another word. Her power had already spoken. The courthouse was tall and imposing, its marble steps polished by decades of hurried feet. On the morning Rachel Carter arrived to finalize her divorce, the air carried a sharp coolness, the kind that seemed to sharpen every sound, every detail. She climbed those steps without hesitation, her heels clicking steadily, her bag hanging lightly at her side. Inside, the long hallways echoed with voices and footsteps, and there, standing with his attorney, was Mark Carter. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly in place, and his expression was one of smug assurance, the face of a man who still believed he was about to emerge victorious. Beside him, Elaine Carter lingered, her presence stiff and judgmental, her lips curled into the faint smile of a woman certain her son had prevailed. Rachel's lawyer, a steady woman named Helen, met her outside the courtroom, handing her a small folder. "It will move quickly," she said softly. "Stay calm. He thinks he has already won." Rachel nodded, her face calm, her voice steady. "He always does." When the clerk called them in, they stepped into the wood-paneled courtroom where the judge waited with quiet authority. Papers shuffled, voices lowered, and then the proceedings began. Mark sat tall, his eyes glancing toward Rachel only briefly, as though she were no more than a formality in the room. His attorney spoke swiftly, summarizing agreements already set in motion. Minimal alimony, no claim on assets, the marriage dissolved with efficiency. Each time the judge paused, Rachel nodded and signed, her hand steady, her silence unbroken. Mark leaned back in his chair as if savoring the moment. To him, Rachel's quietness meant defeat. He mistook her composure for surrender, as he always had. Elaine's expression mirrored his, pleased and satisfied, convinced that Rachel had been cast aside with nothing to show for 12 years of sacrifice. They did not know. They could not know. And Rachel did not tell them. When the final page was signed, the judge gave a brief nod. The divorce is finalized. With the scrape of chairs against the floor, it was done. Years of marriage dissolved in under half an hour. As Mark rose from his seat, he leaned slightly toward Rachel, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Don't spend it all in one place," he whispered, his smirk curling at the edges. Elaine looked on approvingly, as though his words were some final victory lap. But Rachel did not answer. She simply gathered her things, rose from her chair, and walked calmly toward the exit. Outside the courtroom, the midday sun poured across the marble steps, so bright it forced her to squint. Helen touched her arm briefly. "It's finished. You're free." Rachel nodded, her face serene. And then her phone buzzed. She reached into her bag, pulled it free, and saw the notification glowing on the screen. A single line of text, simple and unassuming, but carrying the weight of her entire future. Transfer complete. $100,000 secured in trust account. Rachel stared at it for a moment, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Mark Carter thought she had left empty-handed, stripped of worth and stability. He thought she had surrendered everything, but the truth was far different. He thought she was leaving with nothing. In reality, she had already left with everything. Rachel paused at the top of the courthouse steps, her eyes sweeping over the city below. The traffic hummed, people hurried about their lives, unaware of the shift that had just taken place in hers. To them, it was an ordinary day. To Rachel, it was freedom, hard-earned and unshakable. For years she had been dismissed, underestimated, treated as though her value was tethered to someone else's ambition. Now she stood alone, stronger than she had ever been. As she descended the steps slowly, the words came to her, quiet but certain, the reflection of everything she had endured and everything she had chosen. "He thought I was leaving with nothing, but I had already left with everything." She paused, her phone still in her hand, the sunlight catching the edges of the screen. For a long moment she let the silence settle. Then she whispered to herself one final thought, not as a declaration but as a question, an invitation to anyone who might one day hear her story. Was it revenge, or was it survival? I'll let you decide. Rachel Carter's story does not end on the courthouse steps. It lingers. It asks questions that reach beyond her life and into the hearts of anyone who has ever been underestimated, anyone who has ever been cast aside after giving everything. For years, Mark Carter tore her down, convinced that her worth was nothing without him. He paraded Vanessa Brooks as his upgrade, encouraged by Elaine Carter's endless criticisms, and believed Rachel would fade into silence. Yet Rachel walked away with more than they could ever imagine, her freedom, her dignity, and $100 million secured in her name alone. But her story is not just about numbers in an account or contracts signed behind closed doors. It is about choice. And now the question is yours to consider. If someone tore you down for years and then tried to walk away with everything, would you reveal your secret, or would you keep it hidden forever? These are not easy answers, and perhaps there is no right one. For Rachel, revealing the truth meant reclaiming her power. For others, silence might be its own kind of victory. What would you have done in her place? And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear the one where a wife's inheritance turned out to be worth billions. A twist that shattered every expectation and left even those closest to her in disbelief. That story is coming, and you won't want to miss it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.